Hi everybody, and welcome back to my channel. I would like to apologise for how long this upload has taken. Originally I was ill to the point I really could not speak, so I couldn't film. Then I finally filmed it, edited this video, then stupidly deleted the whole thing. Hadn't backed it up either. To say I was devastated was an understatement. So I've had to do the whole thing again, even research everything because I deleted everything. This is why we should always have a backup. Anyway, I really do apologise, and I hope you stay to the end of this video. It is very interesting and I promise you it will not disappoint. I also want to thank all of you for watching, and it would mean a lot to me if you could please like this video and subscribe to my channel. It does mean a lot, and maybe if you leave a comment if you have any suggestions. All feedback is welcomed. In the last video I mentioned about the most 10 notorious killers in Wales. Today we will be continuing that little series of videos, and the second video will be of the Peter Moores murders. Not to be confused with the infamous Moores murders, even though this guy is probably worse than them. Today's video is of Wales's worst serial killer, Peter Moore, who had approximately 20 years of undiscovered sexual crime acts against men before he moved on to murder in 1995, taking the lives of 4 innocent men. But up until 2021, the families of the victims still did not have the answers they really needed, and that is mainly due to myth, rumours and misinformation, a lot created by Peter Moore himself. This video is a bit of a longer one as we will be talking about all 4 victims, and I don't want to rush this, and would like us all to be able to remember the victims for who they were and not how they were tragically taken from this world. First, as always, a disclaimer will be needed for this video, as we will be talking about sensitive subjects such as violent sexual assault, homophobic hate crimes, homosexuality, murder and mutilation. Peter Howard Moore was born on the 19th of September 1946. He was born in St Helens in Lancashire, and he was an only child. He moved to Kinmel Bay, which is a seaside village in Conwy County, which is in North Wales. He moved there with his family to Darlington House on St Asaph Avenue, whilst he was just a child, and stayed there for the most of his life. This house was a big house in a very prestigious area of Kinmel Bay, and this gave Peter dangerous illusions of grandeur. He felt that he was better than other people who lived in smaller houses than him, and that made it hard for him to make friends of his own. Peter always struggled to control his temper, and often in the family household tensions would be quite high due to Peter's temper, and often his mother Edith was the only one able to control his behaviour. Ernie, Peter's father, ran a hardware shop which was at the back of the big house they lived in. This shop was very popular at the time, as there were very few shops of the same kind. They used to sell things like colour gas, which was used for cookers, fires and things like that. This was before petrol was really in petrol stations, so people often went to their shop. So the Moore family and their shop were very popular, and business was booming. And because they had a successful business, they were able to afford nice things. And despite Peter's arrogance, shall we say, his family was very popular. Peter also loved movies. People often said he was very much like his favourite movie character, Jason, from the Friday the 13th films. Not the macho-ness, but his menacing. And yes, Jason from the Friday the 13th films was his favourite film character, which just says it all there really. And I mean, I'm not saying that all people who watch horror films are murderers or will be, but to idolise the psycho portrayed in those sorts of films cannot be a good sign. Peter also liked crafting homemade movies, and just so happened to be one of the first people in Wales to own an old Cinecam, which is a little handheld video recorder, the first of its kind, very retro. It was a little box with a big lens on the front and a handle attached to the base of the box. And those Cinecams are really where camcorders and handheld video cameras we know today really started. Peter and his family looked happy and normal in these homemade videos, and was often taken at face value. As always, nobody knows what goes on behind closed doors, and there were a lot of rumours of abuse in the Moore family household. Peter was also homosexual, and I'm not saying that to be mean or to degrade him in any way, but it does play a big part of this case, and it was also illegal back then, right up until 1967. He kept this to himself, but his father had his suspicions and tried to hide Peter's femininity. But Peter was quite openly feminine. His relationships with his mother and father were completely on the other ends of the spectrum. Peter loved his mother very much, and she was often the star of his homemade movies. He also called her Chummy, not Mummy, but Chummy, because they were that close. And of course, she spoilt him rotten, as he was the love of her life and an only child. But on the other hand, Peter and his father did not get along that well. Peter's father, Ernie, was a domineering character. He was abusive and he was drunk on a regular basis, and he always asserted his authority over Peter. He also did not like the fact that Peter was very feminine and not macho. Peter did say once that he caught his father on his own living room floor with a man naked, but that is what Peter said, and we have to take that at face value. Like I said, Peter kept his sexuality a secret, and this was mainly out of respect for his mother because he did not want to disappoint her. So Peter had the constant love and affection from his mother and the pressure of his father all the time whilst growing up. Peter also used to work in the shop for his dad and had a good rapport with customers that came into the shop. People that knew Peter described him as a larger-than-life character with a voice that boomed, and he would do anything for you. In the 1980s, sadly, Peter's dad passed away, and he inherited the family business. He also went on to meet a community of film buffs and used to watch B-horror movies, which was nothing too gory at this point. He also met a man named Lewis Carwell, who owned a dilapidated cinema in Denbigh, North Wales. And Peter, still loving his movies, loved that and wanted in on it. And that is exactly what he got. In his later life in the 1990s, Peter Moore was now in his late 40s and a respectable businessman. He now owned 4 cinemas, which was located in Bugill, Holyhead, Kimmel Bay and Denbigh, all located in North Wales. Unfortunately, his mother passed away in 1993, and that hit him very hard. What people did not know was that he was in fact in financial difficulty, and his family business was failing, and he was also in a lot of debt. But this did not change that Peter Moore was a cinema owner by day and a psychopathic sexual predator by night, and he was also dubbed the Man in Black after committing a series of violent sexual assaults on men over the course of 20 years, which then culminated in the murder of 4 men in the space of 3 months in 1995. Peter always wore black due to owning cinemas, and projectionists always wear black for obvious reasons. But there was another cynical reason to why he wore black. Later on in the case, during extensive police interviews, Peter Moore admitted to more than 17 attacks over 20 years. None of them are homicidal, but he did cause serious injuries to several of those people, before then moving on to murdering his victims. He liked to wear black leather when lurking at the meeting places of homosexual men. He was a man who seized upon a climate of gay prejudice. Somehow, he never got reported for those crimes, and it was only that he admitted it years later that we know this even happened. Those poor victims must have been so scared to even tell anybody what had happened to them. Like I said, being homosexual back then was illegal in Britain, so I can imagine that is a big reason as to why these men did not speak up, and some of his victims might not have even been homosexual, which would have made it even harder for those poor men to admit. Also, later, during a search of his home, police found a lot of Nazi paraphernalia in his bedroom, which I think did say a lot about his personality. Former Detective Constable Dave Morris, who arrested Peter Moore, said he was a very dangerous man, one of the most dangerous men I ever met in my time as a police officer. And Mr. Lord Carlisle, the leading prosecutor of the case, said that Peter Moore had met the victims by chance, and he expected to be caught after ending his killing spree with the murder of his bank manager, which did not happen because thankfully he was caught before he could do this, but not soon enough, as we move on to the events of today's case. In 1993, Peter's mother Edith passed away, and this completely destroyed Peter. This might have been why these next events we speak about happened. He did not cope with this well, and his actions take a turn for the worst. It is now September 1995, and Peter no longer gets satisfaction from just injuring his victims. He now wants more. And sadly, Henry Roberts would be the first of his murder victims. His first murder victim, Henry Roberts, was 56, and he was a retired railway worker who lived in a semi-isolation and squalor in a small farmhouse on the outskirts of Caergiliog, Anglesey, near Holyhead. He was described as a loner with no family or immediate family in the area. He very much kept himself to himself. Also, Mr. Roberts coincidentally shared with his killer an enthusiasm for Nazi paraphernalia, which is how they become to know each other. In September 1995, Henry had stopped going to his local pub where he regularly went to drink, which that caused a worry for concern, and a man named Tommy White popped round to Henry's cottage to check if he was okay, but sadly later found the body of Henry Roberts outside his home, face down on the lawn. Tommy first thought he had fallen off the roof, but emergency services later confirmed that his death was due to fatal stab wounds. Henry was found with 13 stab wounds to the back and 14 stab wounds to the front of his body. And also he was found with his trousers wound down by his ankles, and he had been stabbed in either buttock, which was conducted post-mortem. There were also signs of homosexual activity, but police don't know if this happened at the time of the crime or whether it was a reason of motive, which this murder really lacked, a reason of motive. The whole village was stunned. People who knew Mr. Roberts described him as a harmless village eccentric who wouldn't hurt a fly. Mr. Roberts also had a pet Labrador dog, which was found inside the house. I believe he was found alive and well, but I cannot confirm this. Police also start publicly appealing to help find a knife believed to be used in the killing. At this point, Peter was not even a suspect, and the manhunt was on. I would like to add that it is later said by Peter Moore that Mr. Roberts had tried to protest that he was not Jewish, as Peter Moore launched the 27 blows with the combat knife he had bought a few days earlier for just £25, which is just unbelievable. But obviously only Peter knows this, and we will probably never know what really happened to any of his victims. Peter Moore's next victim was killed between October and November 1995. But wasn't found until after, when Peter had confessed to his murder and gave police the location of the body. He was Peter Moore's second victim, Edward Carthy. Edward Carthy was 28 and he was from Birkenhead in Liverpool. He was a drug addict and an alcoholic, but he was very clever and he came with an abundance of qualifications. His sister said he just loved to read and he would read all day. He had a heart of gold and he would give you his last penny. Edward had met Peter in a gay bar in Liverpool, and they drove to North Wales, where Peter stabbed Edward to death and buried him in a dense forest in Clerkenwell near Ruthin. As I said before, Edward was the last victim to be found, months after his death on the 25th of December. And it was only after Peter had been arrested and confessed and then drew a diagram of where to find Edward's body. And sadly, when they did find Edward's body, animals had already got to it, and sadly Edward's head and one of his arms were missing. They did, however, find the skull not too far away from the rest of the body, and they could determine from dental records that he was indeed Edward Carthy. The autopsy also revealed that Edward Carthy had been stabbed 3 times in the stomach, which was his cause of death. When Peter confessed, he also said that Edward asked if he was one of them Nielsen-type blokes, referring to Dennis Nielsen, the serial killer, and Peter replied yes, as he stabbed Edward in the stomach 3 times. At the time of Peter's arrest, he said to Edward's family that he had severed Edward's head and removed his arms, but that was not true, and this had happened from animals. Also, police had told the family that Edward had died from a single stab wound, and it wasn't until 15 years later that Edward's family finally found out how he really died. And I don't know why the police had lied to them originally. I think the family deserved to know the truth about what happened, and not have had to listen to those horrible rumours. On November 30th, 1995, at 7:30 a.m, a workman made a discovery of another dead body on the floor of a caravan at a construction site at Mona near Llangethni in Anglesey, close to the A5. The victim was Peter Moore's third victim, Keith Randalls. As I said at this point, they hadn't found Edward Carthy's body yet, and they hadn't connected the dots between Henry Roberts' murder and Keith Randalls' murder. Keith Randalls was 49, he was from Chester, and he was an old traffic manager. He was described as an ordinary, harmless, conscientious man who had a reputation for shy good humour. He was a straight man with 2 children. He was also described by his wife as a very kind man. He was loving and affectionate, and everybody that knew him liked him, and he did not have any enemies.
Very kind man, very loving, very affectionate. He didn't have any enemies. Everybody who knew him liked him.
At the time of his death, Keith Randalls worked as a night watchman at the construction site that he was found dead. This was just 5 miles from where the murder of Henry Roberts took place. A security manager of the construction site had opened the door of Keith's work caravan late at night and found Keith lying there in a pool of his own blood. The caravan was in disarray, and again he had multiple stab wounds to be a clear indication of the cause of death. When police had got there, Keith's trousers were pulled up into the normal position. But it is later found out that the security manager who found Keith found him with his trousers pulled down, and he had pulled them back up to give Keith some decency. Autopsy revealed that Keith Randalls had been stabbed 12 times in the chest and was covered in defensive wounds and had a big slash under one of his armpits. Also, about 9:30 p.m. on November the 29th, he had gone to a fish and chip shop, and that was the last time he had been seen alive. At about 2:45 a.m. on the 30th of November, a man driving from Holyhead had seen a Ford Transit van near roadworks, near the construction site. Again, there was no real reason for motive for this murder, especially considering Keith was not a homosexual. Peter Moore later told police that when Mr. Randalls asked why he was being attacked, Peter told him that it was just for fun. At this point, his sexual preferences had taken a dark and perverted turn for the worst. He enjoyed dominating his victims mentally and physically. And so now police have 2 murder cases on their hand, and there are no leads, and they haven't got much to go on, as there wasn't CCTV back in them days, so they just had to go on physical evidence and good old door-to-door police work. On the 18th of December 1995, police find the 3rd victim, Anthony Davis, known as Tony. He was found on Pensarn Beach in Abergele, near Colwyn Bay, the usual meeting place near his home for homosexual men. There was no evidence suggesting that Tony was a homosexual, but there was a possibility that he was involved in homosexual activities, but his family strongly denied that he was. Anthony was 35 and a father of 2. He was a loving family man, and he worked at a crematorium and was from a town called Fleecefine. Tony was found by police constable Phil Greaves after they had been looking for him due to being reported missing by relatives. They found Tony's car parked by the seawall of Pensarn Beach in Abergele. Shortly after, they found Tony's body, fully clothed, with a sweater on, and his zipper on his trousers undone. Tony's body had 6 stab wounds, and it also had slits to the abdomen, pubis area, and the chest area. And again, he had also been stabbed in each buttock, exactly like Henry Roberts, Peter's first victim. Also, whilst forensics examined the scene, they found an unidentified blood drop, which did not belong to the victim. So now police have 3 murder cases to investigate, and Peter was not on the radar as a suspect or of a person of interest, and police needed to delve deeper into the investigations. Police now decide that this 3rd murder case was in fact gay prejudice, so they reach out to the LGBTQ community to come forward with any evidence at all. And lo and behold, they get 1 phone call, which leads to something interesting. This phone call was anonymous, and this man had claimed that another man had approached him on Pensarn Beach dressed in black leather and had been taken to a house in Kimmel Bay where he was attacked, sexually assaulted and beaten. He also said he was lucky to get away alive. He also gave police a rough description of the house he had been taken to. So now police have some extra leads, and they start making more inquiries, and police go to the location that the anonymous man gave them, and guess what they find? Peter Moore's house. Dave Morris, the detective sergeant who drove to this location, knew of Peter quite well, as he had dealt with him as a uniformed officer. He also knew that Peter was in fact homosexual, and he wore black leather, and he also saw Peter wearing this leather before. The detective was happy that he had indeed identified the house that this anonymous man had been taken to and abused. The police officer went back and spoke with another team who were looking for a van in relation to this attack. Police soon found out that there was a hire company in Denby with the same emblem on their vans as the one they were looking for. So police filter through the names of the people who might have rented these vans, and they find one name crop up again, and that was Peter Moore, which then catapulted Peter Moore into David Powis's number one suspect slot. Police now have enough circumstantial evidence and arrest Peter Moore on the 22nd of December 1995 on the suspicion of murder. He shows no emotion and asks no questions. Police then gather evidence from his home and take his van for forensic testing. They took him to Walton Police Station for questioning, and at the time of his arrest, they find a black duffel bag in the back of the van he was driving, and hidden inside the duffel bag was a commando knife. At this point, Peter Moore is completely denying responsibility for the death of Tony Davis. But remember I said that there was unidentified blood at the scene? Well, as you can guess, it was in fact Peter Moore's blood. The wound had been caused as Mr. Davis fought for his life, which would have placed Peter right there. Police then go on to charge Peter with the murder of Tony Davis. And also, during this interview, they are also connecting the dots with the murder of Keith Randalls. So not long after he was charged with the murder of Tony Davis, he was then charged with the murder of Keith Randalls on the same day. Peter Moore was totally shocked by both charges and denied them both for the next 2 days. Then, on the 24th of December 1995, Christmas Eve, Peter asked for another interview. And this is where he would make his cold confession. I quote, "I want to admit both of the murders in Anglesey, the murder on Pensarn Beach, and also I want to admit to another murder that you don't know about, which I committed in Crickkennog Forest near Ruthven." Which that murder he was confessing to was of course Edward Carthy. As you can imagine, the police was not expecting a confession, never mind a fourth victim they had now had to find. As I said previously, Peter drew a diagram of where to find the final body. He also said during his interview that it was lucky that he'd caught him in time, because he definitely would have killed more men. So now police have charged Peter with 2 of the 4 murders, Tony Davis and Keith Randalls. They also searched for evidence to charge him for the other 2 murders, because police obviously cannot just accept what he is saying without proof that he actually done it. As the police conduct their search, the knife that they had found in Peter's possession at the time of the arrest was tested, and it did in fact have all 4 victims' blood on it, and also a load more other victims he had assaulted in the past. When police searched Peter Moore's home, they found items belonging to his victims in the house and in the garden pond, such as Keith Randall's jacket hanging up in the cupboard and a Nazi flag he had stolen from Henry Roberts' house. There was also an incongruous mixture of chintz curtains, a pair of fluffy toy kittens on a bed, handcuffs and military uniforms. Also on a shelf in Peter Moore's bedroom was a police helmet, 2 German military caps and a pair of long black boots, and hanging on a cupboard alongside the bed was a truncheon. There was also blood spatter on the walls of his room from where previous people had been whipped during various sex acts. His house was covered with Nazi paraphernalia and S&M toys, all except his mother's bedroom, which he had kept exactly the same as when she was alive. During his interviews and confession, Peter also admits to his previous sexual offences, and detectives ask why he did this and why he committed the murders and how it made him feel. Peter said that it was a job well done and that he was doing it for fun. He also says that it felt like a knife going through butter. And Peter did say as well that Edward Carthy had asked if he was one of them Nielsen type blokes just moments before his death. It's just sick and twisted, like how you can look at someone in the eye whilst doing such a thing and not lose a wink of sleep. It's just crazy. Anyway, at this point, Peter Moore was held on remand. A few hours after he had made his confession, he asked for another interview, and then suddenly withdrew every word. He said he had made it all up. It was a man named Jason who was responsible for all the killings, and that he was innocent or a bystander almost. It was almost as if he was playing mind games with the police. One last bit of control, maybe. This character he had named was actually based on Jason from the Friday the 13th films. And as we know, Jason is Peter's favourite movie character, and tries to use this to get out of his confession. Surely he didn't think that police would actually believe him. Honestly, you couldn't make this stuff up. Police obviously did not believe him, and with all the evidence they now had, it linked Peter to every victim and every murder scene. So they have enough evidence to charge him with all 4 murders. But I need to tell you this. Unfortunately, a taxi driver by the name of Nigel Owens was wrongly accused and charged with the murder of Peter's first victim, Henry Roberts, and Nigel remained in custody until Peter had confessed to all 4 murders and was also charged. This is just so sad because the connections the police made with Nigel to make an arrest wasn't even concrete. It was all mainly on a whim, because Nigel had ferried Henry about back and forth to Hollywood 5 days out of 7. There was no physical evidence, and Nigel probably would have spent the rest of his life in prison, an innocent man. As you can imagine, being charged for the murder you did not commit, it must have been terrifying. Luckily, thank God, they arrested Peter for the murders, and Nigel was released immediately after. Finally, in November 1996, over a year after the first murder took place, the trial of Peter Moore started at Mould Crown Court, and the lead prosecutor of the case was known to be one of the best in the UK, Lord Carlisle. On given evidence, Moore still claimed that the crimes were committed by a homosexual lover nicknamed Jason. The jury of 8 men and 4 women took just 2 hours and 35 minutes to find him guilty. And after 4 weeks of trials, Peter Moore was given 4 life sentences. Mr. Justice Maurice Kay said he will recommend Peter Moore spends the rest of his life behind bars. The judge also told Peter Moore, "You were responsible for the 4 sadistic murders in the space of 3 months. None of the victims had done you the slightest bit of harm." And Mr. Lord Carlisle said that Peter Moore was a dominant homosexual and a violent, predatory sadist who drew sexual satisfaction from causing pain and suffering. By day he appeared only to be an unremarkable businessman. Mr. Carlisle also said the nocturnal Peter Moore was one of the most dangerous people to have ever set foot in Wales. Even Peter Moore's own barrister, Eric Somerset Jones, said, "I hold no brief for Moore's way of life. On his own admission, he is a bad man." Also, his own lawyer now suffers with PTSD and suicidal thoughts from the horrendous case. In June 2008, Peter Moore was told by the High Court that he would spend the rest of his life in prison. But on the 3rd of March 2011, Moore challenged the ruling in the European Court of Human Rights, with a view to having his sentence quashed, and such a whole life order sentences should be outlawed throughout Europe. On the 17th of January 2012, it was announced that his appeal had failed, but, however, on the 9th of July 2013, it was announced by the European Court of Human Rights there had to be a possibility of release and review to be compatible with human rights. Personally, I think that this man gave up his rights the minute he took his first life. I don't think that he should ever be released, and if he does, I think he would definitely kill again. He even said so himself. Currently, Peter Moore is still alive and under lock and key at Wakefield High Security Prison, which has been dubbed the Monster Mansion. he is there along with 600 of the UK's most dangerous criminals. He is on the Supermax wing, which has been home to murderers like Dr. Death, Howard Shipman, child killer Ian Huntley, and Mark Bridger, who murdered 5-year-old April Jones in 2012. It's even said that he befriended Howard Shipman before Howard's death in 2004. If you would like to know more about this video, there is a documentary on BBC iPlayer that you could watch. But that is it for me and this video. Thank you for staying to the end. I know it was a long one today, but I appreciate you watching. As always, my thoughts go out to all of the families involved. I can't imagine the pain they have gone through for the past 25 years. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and maybe a little comment, and please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell so you don't miss the next video. This really helps out the channel and I really appreciate any support from you guys. Again, I would like to apologise for the late upload and for the croakiness of my voice, because I don't think I fully recovered properly yet. Anyway, I'll see you in my next video. Bye!